Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're going deep on JavaScript.
Oh, nice.
We've got a few books to help guide our deep dive.
Yeah.
We've got Eloquent JavaScript, which, seems like the textbook everyone uses, JavaScript Notes for professionals, for when we need like a quick reference.
That makes sense.
And then JavaScript, the good parts, for, I guess for the good parts.
Sounds good.
So think of this deep dive as your like crash course into JavaScript,
Okay.
all the good stuff, all the weird stuff, everything.
And what's interesting is that Eloquent JavaScript doesn't just talk about, the language itself,
Right.
but it also covers how it's used in web browsers.
Oh,
and
yeah.
even dives into Node.js for when you want to go, beyond the browser.
Yeah. And speaking of Eloquent JavaScript, I was looking through it, and I
Yeah.
was really surprised that it actually walks you through building 5 different projects.
Oh, wow.
A delivery robot, your own programming language. I mean, come on.
That's awesome.
That's pretty wild.
Building projects is like the best way to learn.
Yeah.
And having those concrete goals, I think, can help solidify your understanding.
For sure. Okay, so let's get down to the basics here. Eloquent JavaScript talks about how JavaScript at its core is all about simple instructions,
Right.
executed incredibly fast, which, I mean, when you think about it, that's kind of
Yeah, it makes sense.
mind-blowing when you think about, how complex it can get.
It is, yeah. It's kind of like building a house, right?
Okay.
Individual bricks on their own are pretty simple,
Yeah.
but you put them together in the right way and you can build, an incredibly complex and impressive structure.
Totally. And like with any construction project, Eloquent JavaScript and actually JavaScript, the good parts also,
Yeah.
they both really stress the importance of having good structure in your code.
Oh,
You
absolutely.
can't just, throw things together randomly.
No.
You need functions, objects, arrays, all of these things, these tools to kind of keep things organized.
Right, it's like a recipe. If you just start adding ingredients randomly, you're probably not going to end up with a very tasty dish.
Right.
But if you follow the steps, measure everything carefully,
Yeah.
you can create something, delicious and complex.
Right. And when you get a well-structured program working, it's so satisfying.
It is.
It's like, yes,
Yeah.
this beautiful thing is all because of the code I wrote.
Absolutely.
Mm.
And speaking of structure, Eloquent JavaScript introduces this concept of control flow,
Okay.
which is basically how a program executes its instructions,
Yeah.
from top to bottom,
Oh, okay.
like a story unfolding.
So it's like a set of directions, like one step at a time.
Yeah, pretty much.
But it can get more complex than that, right?
Definitely. The story can branch out in different directions. You've got things called conditional statements,
Okay.
like if, else, switch, and they let the program make decisions
Right.
based on certain conditions. And then you have looping statements like while, do, and for, which let you repeat actions.
So it's not just linear, it can loop back and make choices, so that makes it more dynamic.
Exactly.
Okay, I see how it can get pretty complex pretty quickly.
Yeah, and that's where functions come in.
Okay.
Eloquent JavaScript and JavaScript Notes for professionals both kind of describe them as
Yeah,
reusable blocks of code that perform specific tasks.
gotcha.
They can take input, what we call arguments,
Mm.
process them, and then they can optionally return a value.
So it's like having a specialized tool in your coding toolbox.
No, think of it like that.
Like if I need to calculate something, there's a function for that. If I need to manipulate text, boom, there's a function for that too.
Exactly. And to help visualize how all these function calls are managed, Eloquent JavaScript uses this analogy of a call stack.
Okay.
And you can think of it like a stack of books.
Sure.
Every time a function is called, it's like adding a book to the stack.
Okay.
And when the function finishes, you take the top book off.
So it's a way for the program to keep track of what's currently running and in what order. I like that. It makes it a lot easier to understand.
Visuals are always helpful.
Yes, for sure. Now, one thing that kind of surprised me, and maybe this is maybe this is a quirk, but JavaScript seems pretty relaxed about arguments.
It is, yeah. If you provide too many arguments to a function, it just ignores the extras.
Oh, really?
And if you don't provide enough, it just assigns those missing ones the value of undefined.
So it's like JavaScript is saying, don't sweat the small stuff.
Kind of, yeah.
But I feel like that could cause problems, though, right? Like, what happens if you try to use an undefined value?
That's a great question, and that is something that we'll dig into later on.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. All right, so I'm feeling like I'm starting to grasp these basic building blocks of JavaScript.
Yeah.
But there's one concept I'm particularly curious about:
What's that?
recursion.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that wild project in Eloquent JavaScript about building your own programming language?
Right.
It mentions using recursion, and that just sounds kind of mind-bending to me.
Recursion is a fascinating
Yeah.
concept.
Yeah.
It's where a function actually calls itself,
Whoa. Okay, so it's like,
like a snake eating its own tail.
okay. I'm intrigued, but I'm also a little terrified.
Don't worry, it's not as scary as it sounds.
Okay.
It's incredibly powerful for solving problems that can be broken down into like smaller, self-similar steps.
Okay.
And the example they use in Eloquent JavaScript, they use it to find a number through a series of additions and multiplications.
Oh, wow.
It's really quite elegant.
Okay, I think I'm gonna need some more explanation on that one.
We'll get there.
But I'm excited to learn more. So we've talked about functions, these reusable blocks of code.
Yeah.
But what about the data these functions work with?
Right.
I mean, how does JavaScript handle information?
That's where objects come in. Eloquent JavaScript describes them as collections of key value pairs.
Okay.
You can think of it like a dictionary where each word has a definition. So, in an object, each key has a corresponding value. And these values can be anything: numbers, text, even other functions.
So objects are like containers for all sorts of data.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. But are they just static containers? Or can they change?
That's a key difference between objects and some other data types like numbers and strings.
Okay.
Objects are mutable, meaning you can change their properties after they're created.
Oh, okay.
And this makes them really flexible for managing the state of your program, things that might change over time.
So objects are dynamic, they can adapt. Okay,
Yeah.
that's pretty powerful. Eloquent JavaScript also talks about the difference between object identity and constant bindings. Can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, so when you use const to define an object, you're essentially fixing its location in memory.
Okay.
You're saying this object will always live here.
Gotcha.
But that doesn't mean that the contents of the object can't change.
Mhm.
You can still modify its properties, similar to how you can, edit the definitions in a dictionary without replacing the entire dictionary.
So the object itself stays put.
Yeah.
But its contents can be updated. Okay, that clarifies it a lot.
Mhm.
So we've got functions for actions and objects for storing data.
Right.
It feels like we're building up, like a pretty solid toolkit here.
We are.
But Eloquent JavaScript also mentions arrays, which seem to be like a specific way to organize data.
Yeah, you can think of an array as an ordered list of items,
Okay.
like a shopping list,
All right.
where each item has a specific position.
Gotcha.
And JavaScript has these handy things called loops that make it really easy to work with arrays.
Okay.
For example, there's this for.otherla loop that lets you go through each item in an array one by one.
So you can use loops to perform actions on each element.
Exactly. It's like checking off items on your shopping list.
Okay, that seems really useful, especially for,
Yeah.
dealing with lists of data.
Absolutely. And it goes even further with powerful array methods like reduce.
Okay.
Eloquent JavaScript is a cool example where they use reduce to find the longest script out of a set of scripts.
Oh, wow.
So you can really analyze and manipulate data with these methods.
This is all making a lot more sense now, but I have to admit I am still a little intimidated by just how much there is to learn about JavaScript.
It can be a little overwhelming, but don't worry.
Right.
Eloquent JavaScript and all these resources, they do a good job of breaking things down into manageable pieces.
Yeah, that's reassuring.
And the more you explore, the more you start to see these patterns and connections
Right.
that make JavaScript such a powerful language.
That's great to hear. It's really great to have, these resources and your expertise as we kind of go through all this.
Right.
So we've got functions, objects, arrays. What else do we need to add to our JavaScript toolkit?
One crucial aspect we should talk about is character encodings.
Oh, okay.
Eloquent JavaScript brings up UTF-8, which is kind of like a universal language for representing text from different languages.
Okay.
And it's super important for making sure text is displayed correctly,
Right.
especially if you're dealing with, international characters.
Yeah, that's really important, to think about. Like, you don't want your program to spit out gibberish when it encounters text from a different language.
Okay.
So character encodings are key for making sure that things are accessible to everyone.
Absolutely.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Functions, objects, arrays, character encodings.
Yeah,
It feels like we're building a good foundation for understanding JavaScript.
for sure.
But before we move on, are there any potential pitfalls or things that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, JavaScript has its strengths,
Right.
but does have a few, shall we say, idiosyncrasies,
Okay.
things that might seem a little counterintuitive at first.
Okay, so what do we need to watch out for?
Well, one thing that often trips people up
Yeah.
is that whole optional arguments thing we were talking about.
Yeah. Right. Right.
If you don't provide enough arguments, JavaScript just fills in the blanks with undefined.
Right. It doesn't really complain.
But undefined isn't quite the same as null.
Okay.
They both kind of represent the absence of a value, but they're these subtle differences that can be confusing if you're not careful.
Okay, so that seems like a nuance that we really need to pay attention to.
Yeah, it can save you a lot of debugging headaches.
Good to know. Good to know.
Before we jump into all that, though, maybe we should take a quick break.
All right, sounds good. Let's take a break and we'll be right back.
All right, so ready to jump back into those JavaScript quirks we were talking about?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I'm all about embracing those quirks, you know?
Okay, good, good.
What makes JavaScript tick?
Right. Well, we were talking about pitfalls,
Mm.
and one that JavaScript Notes for Professionals really emphasizes is comments.
Oh, comments. I mean, those are just notes for humans, right?
Right.
I didn't think they actually affected how the code ran.
You're right, they don't.
Okay.
But they are incredibly valuable for making your code understandable
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
for yourself in the future, and also for anyone else who might have to read or work with your code.
Yeah. When you're in the zone writing the code, it all seems like crystal clear, right?
Of course.
But then you come back to it later, or if someone else tries to figure out what you did,
Right. Exactly.
it can turn into a real mess.
Exactly. And comments are like those signposts,
Okay.
that guide you through the code, help you understand the logic.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They can explain why you made certain decisions or point out potential issues.
So basically, good comments are good documentation.
Yeah, pretty much.
And that makes the code easier to maintain in the long run.
Absolutely. Now, another quirk that often catches people off guard
Okay.
is related to how JavaScript deals with function declarations versus function expressions.
Okay, function declarations, that seems straightforward.
Right.
You use the function keyword, give it a name, define what it does.
Right. But what about function expressions?
Yeah, what are those exactly?
So it's basically treating a function as a value that can be assigned to a variable.
Oh,
It's a
okay.
little more flexible.
So instead of giving the function a name, you can store it in a variable and use that variable to call it.
Exactly.
Okay, interesting. So that adds another layer of flexibility, right?
It does.
But it seems like with more flexibility, there's more room for things to go wrong.
You're not wrong.
Yeah.
And Eloquent JavaScript actually talks about this error handling.
Right.
It's super important for building like robust programs.
Okay, yeah. So how do we handle errors in JavaScript?
Well, JavaScript has a built-in structure called try.catch,
Okay.
specifically for dealing with exceptions,
Except.
those unexpected events that might, mess up the normal flow of your program.
So it's like a safety net.
You can think of it that way.
Yeah.
You put the code that might cause an error inside the try block,
Right.
and if something goes wrong, it jumps to the catch block. And that allows you to handle the error gracefully.
Okay.
Maybe display a message to the user or log the error for debugging purposes.
That's really helpful.
Eloquent JavaScript has a great example with this function called prompt direction
Right.
that really shows how try.catch works.
Yeah, I remember that. But how do you know what errors to expect?
That's where good programming practices come in.
Okay.
Part of writing good code is anticipating those potential problems.
Right.
And Eloquent JavaScript talks about assertions.
Assertions.
Yeah, these are checks you add to your code to verify assumptions.
Oh, okay. So like making sure everything's running as expected.
Exactly. It's like a built-in quality control for your code.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it.
So yeah, we've got comments, function expressions, error handling, assertions. These are all essential for good coding practices.
Right. It's like building up our JavaScript maintenance toolkit.
Exactly. Now that we've covered some basics and a few potential pitfalls,
Yeah.
let's explore some more advanced features.
Okay, yeah, let's do it.
We'll start with prototypes.
Okay.
Remember how we were talking about objects inheriting properties and methods?
Right.
Well, prototypes are at the heart of that inheritance mechanism.
Okay, so if you have like a prototype for a car,
Mm,
you could then create different types of cars, sedan, sports car, truck, and they would all inherit those basic car properties.
yeah, exactly. It's a way to avoid code duplication.
Okay.
and create hierarchies of objects that share common behavior.
Yeah.
Eloquent JavaScript uses an example of a rabbit constructor function to demonstrate.
Right. Right.
All rabbit objects created from that constructor can use the methods defined on the rabbit prototype.
So it's like creating blueprints for objects
Yeah,
and then reusing those blueprints to create individual instances.
exactly.
That's a really good way to put it. It helps me understand how prototypes, enable this object-oriented programming in JavaScript.
It's a core part of it.
Very cool. It's like we're peeling back the layers of JavaScript here, and we're uncovering all this power.
And speaking of powerful features, Eloquent JavaScript also talks about modules, which are basically self-contained units of code that can be reused and combined.
So instead of having all your code in one giant file, you can break it down into these smaller, manageable modules.
Precisely.
Okay.
And that's like crucial for managing complexity, especially as your programs grow larger.
Right. It's like using building blocks to
Okay.
create different structures.
Exactly.
I like that. So how do modules actually work?
So Eloquent JavaScript talks about a few different module systems.
Okay.
There's the common JS format that's often used in Node.js.
Okay.
And then there are ECMAScript modules, which are part of the language standard.
So different environments might have different ways of handling them.
Right. But the basic idea is the same.
Gotcha. Breaking down code into reusable units, which is super helpful
Yeah.
for larger projects.
It is. As we move into more advanced stuff, we'll see just how much modules help structure our code.
All right, this is great stuff. It feels like we're really getting a good understanding of JavaScript.
Good.
What else is there?
Well, one thing we can't ignore is asynchronous programming.
Oh, asynchronous programming.
Yeah.
Eloquent JavaScript has a whole chapter on that, right?
It does.
And it talks about how it's a different way of thinking about how code is executed.
Yeah, so in traditional synchronous programming, your code runs line by line.
Right, one step at a time.
Exactly.
Okay.
But in asynchronous programming, you can have multiple things happening at the same time.
It's like multitasking.
Yes.
Okay.
Your program can start a long-running task in the background
Right.
and continue with other things without waiting for that task to finish.
That's really important for web development, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
You don't want the entire page to freeze while, an image is downloading.
Right, that makes sense. So asynchronous programming allows those things to happen in the background
Exactly.
while the user can still interact with the page.
Eloquent JavaScript actually has a good example of a program that simulates a network of crow's nests
Oh, yeah.
communicating with each other.
Right.
And they use these asynchronous operations to send messages
Okay.
without blocking the entire network.
That's a good illustration.
It is. Now, obviously, managing these operations can be a bit tricky,
Yeah, I can imagine.
but JavaScript has evolved and now has some powerful features to deal with.
Like what?
Eloquent JavaScript talks about promises and async await.
Promises and async await. Okay, those sound a little bit mysterious.
Think of a promise as a placeholder for a value that will be available in the future.
Okay.
It's basically saying, I promise to give you this value once I have it.
Okay.
And async await lets you write asynchronous code that looks and feels more synchronous.
So it makes it easier to read.
Exactly. Much easier to understand.
All right, definitely need to learn more about those. So we've covered prototypes, modules, asynchronous programming. What else is there?
Well, there's one last piece, Node.js.
Node.js.
It's mentioned a lot in Eloquent JavaScript, and it really changes what you can do with JavaScript.
Okay, but what exactly is Node.js?
Think of it as a way to run JavaScript outside of a web browser.
Oh, okay.
You can use it to build command line tools, desktop applications, and most importantly, servers.
Oh, servers, like the things that power websites.
Exactly.
So with Node.js, you can run JavaScript on the back end.
Precise.
Wow, that's huge.
It opens up a lot of possibilities for developers.
All right, so we've gone from those basic building blocks of JavaScript functions, objects, arrays,
Right.
to these really advanced concepts.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. And it feels like, we've gotten a good understanding of what JavaScript is capable of.
We have.
And I'm excited to keep exploring. But what's next?
Well, now that we have this good foundation, maybe we can dive into some of JavaScript's more, shall we say, quirky behaviors.
Quirky behaviors. Okay, you've got my attention. Let's dive in. All right, so those quirky behaviors, those JavaScript quirks, you got me really interested.
Yeah. So remember how JavaScript is like super flexible with function arguments?
Right, like if you don't provide enough, it just fills them in with undefined.
Exactly. And JavaScript Notes for professionals points out that this can be, a bit of a trap.
Okay, how so?
let's say you have a function, right? And it's supposed to add two numbers together,
Okay.
but you accidentally call it with just one number.
So then the second one's going to be undefined.
Exactly. And here's the thing.
Yeah.
If you try to do math with undefined,
Right.
you're going to end up with nan, which means not a number.
Right.
And once you've got nan in your calculations, well, it kind of spreads like a virus, you know.
Oh, so it can really mess things up.
It can. So to avoid that,
Yeah.
you got to be really careful with those arguments.
So always double check those arguments.
You can use if statements to see if something's undefined.
Oh, okay. Like before doing any calculation.
Exactly. And if it is undefined, you can either give it a default value or, throw an error to say, like, hey, something's wrong here.
Yeah, that makes sense. Handle those undefined values carefully.
Okay, now let's talk about prototypes. JavaScript. The good parts talks about this too.
Okay, yeah, prototypes. Those are a way for objects to inherit, right?
Right, but they also warn against trying to force traditional object-oriented patterns onto JavaScript.
Wait, what? Why wouldn't those work with prototypes?
Those traditional patterns, they were made for languages with classes, like Java or C++.
Right.
But JavaScript doesn't have classes in the same way. It has this direct form of inheritance called prototypal inheritance.
So you don't have a class, but you have an object that acts as the prototype.
Exactly. And other objects can inherit straight from that.
Oh, okay. That makes it really dynamic then.
It does. You can create objects on the fly, change prototypes, you can create all sorts of complex inheritance chains.
So it's powerful, but it also sounds like you really need to know what you're doing.
You do. Understanding prototypes is key to writing good JavaScript code.
All right, noted. Work with the system, not against it.
Now, JavaScript Notes for Professionals mentions this thing called hoisting.
Hoisting, what's that?
It's one of those things in JavaScript that can be a bit confusing.
Okay.
Basically, it means that variable and function declarations,
Yeah.
they're moved to the top of their scope before the code runs.
Oh, wow. So it's like JavaScript's rearranging things behind the scenes.
Kinda, yeah. So you can actually use a variable or a function before it appears in your code.
Really?
Yeah.
But shouldn't you have to define something before you can use it?
In most languages, yes, but not in JavaScript.
Okay, well that sounds like it could lead to some unexpected results.
It can. So it's good practice to just declare your variables and functions at the top anyway.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. Keep things organized.
Now let's talk about equality. Seems simple, right?
Yeah. Two things are either equal or they're not.
But JavaScript has two types of equality operators.
Oh, right. The double equals and the triple equal.
Right. JavaScript, the good parts,
Yeah.
is really adamant about understanding the difference.
So, refresh my memory. What's the difference again?
Double equals, it does this thing called type coercion,
Bro.
meaning it tries to convert the values to the same type before comparing them.
So it's more flexible, but maybe a bit less predictable.
Exactly. Triple equals, it checks both value and type without any conversion.
So triple equals is the stricter one.
Yes, and it's generally the recommended one.
Okay, triple equals for strict equality.
Exactly. So, we've really explored a lot with JavaScript.
We have functions, objects, all sorts of quirky behaviors, prototypes, Node.js.
It's been quite a deep dive.
It has. I feel like I have a much better grasp of the language now.
Good, good. And remember, the best way to really learn is to actually write code.
Yeah, get your hands dirty, make mistakes.
Exactly. You learn from those mistakes.
All right, everyone. Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into JavaScript.
Hope you enjoyed it.
If you want to learn more, I highly recommend picking up Eloquent JavaScript, JavaScript Notes for Professionals, or JavaScript, the good parts.
All great resources.
Yeah, and most importantly, just start coding. You might be surprised at what you can build.
You never know what you might create.
That's right. Until next time.